I'm not a neuroscientist. This is a kind of, I'm interested in human-computer interface, in our, human-machine confluence. And this is a typical setup from my lab in IDC Herzliya, that's 5 minutes to the north of here. So you have, for example, interactions with virtual reality, with intelligent virtual characters that respond to your nonverbal behavior based on the Kinect camera or based on your neurophysiology. And one of the main things we're interested in is brain-computer interface as an extreme form of human-computer interface. So, זה אמור לעבוד? לא נורא, לא, בסדר. It's okay. Okay, so brain-computer interface, the idea is very simple. It's been around since 1970s, but it's become very popular in the last 10, 15 years with a growing power in signal processing, machines, etc. The idea is that we extract some signals from the brain, and when a person is still alive, and it's a person, and we process it with a system called the BCI, or sometimes you see BMI, which is basically signal processing and machine learning. And then we extract some meaningful information from these signals and use them as a control signal to control an application. For example, to control a computer, for paralyzed people to control a wheelchair, or essentially to control any device that you can imagine. And also important, it's a closed loop system. There's a feedback going on from the application to the person. So it's not only an engineering effort in the BCI, it's also, there's a lot of adaptation in terms of the person. The person learns how to use this interface over time. So it's kind of a dual loop system, okay? Now, related, especially to what I want to talk about today, related but different is neurofeedback. Neurofeedback is different from brain-computer interface mainly in two ways. The first is that the goal is different. In BCI, the goal is to control an application by thought. In neurofeedback, the goal is to allow people to learn to regulate their brain activity. So the goal is not the device, but the human. And the second difference is that at least until now, until recently, neurofeedback was usually done in a very simple way. The system just visualizes your brain signals, and the whole work is done by the human. Okay, now we are looking at all kinds of new possibilities using the same technologies that we use for BCI, but with the goal of neurofeedback. So again, recognizing, imagine, so in the past, you could do training like take your alpha brain waves up and down, and it's also used as a treatment for ADHD and stuff like that. But imagine that you can locate very, very specific brain patterns with very meaningful psychological consequences and train people to, just like working on a gym, working on these very, very specific circuits. So technologically, BCI and neurofeedback are very similar, in my opinion, although the goals are different. And what I'll talk about today, I think, relates to both. So with humans, we are limited to the kind of signals that we can extract from humans. And usually it would be EEG, but also, of course, NIRS, MEG, fMRI. These ones are obviously much less accessible, not only expensive, but less accessible. These ones, which are, could be widely available, because the recording is done from outside the scalp, typically have very low spatial resolution. These methods, fMRI, NIRS, are not based on electrical activity, but on the, on the Bold level or the oxygenation level, and so they suffer from an inherent delay. There's an inherent temporal problem with these methods. So each method has its advantages, or mostly its disadvantages, and we are limited. And of course, in humans also there is a few number of studies with invasive methods, either ECOG, electrodes placed outside the brain but inside the skull, much better signal-to-noise ratio, and also, of course, the famous electrode array implanted in a very small number of individual humans with some success, some impressive success of, this paralyzed patient who 5 years after implant was able to... I'm sorry?
I'm going to show the movie.
You're going to show the movie. Okay,
but
so
you can show it.
No, I'm not going to show this movie. I might show other movies. because we do not, I do not work with these invasive implants, so our job is much more difficult to compete, with these implanted electrodes, but using non-invasive techniques. And so it's not all bad news. Even with EEG, which is a very noisy signal, there has been methods to, specifically I used this method. I was fortunate to work with this group in Austria, Furcheler, which was one of the pioneers in this field. So you can detect here, there's a very, very large maps, somatotopic maps, and you can detect left hand, right hand, and feet imagery from EEG in premotor or motor areas. And but moreover, the idea is, so you can see that this is ERD, event-related desynchronization in the alpha and beta bands. The challenge is, unlike most traditional neuroscience experiments where you average things, in many trials, many subjects, the challenge in BCI is much more difficult because we want to have single trial success. So the effects have to be much more robust. So fortunately, some effects, even in EEG, are robust enough. In this motor imagery, you can imagine your left hand, right hand, feet, and with enough training and engineering effort, you can do a BCI. And I was fortunate to take part in one of these projects, which I'll hopefully show you the video. Okay, you see I have this thing here called Plan B for those cases where the video don't work. Now, if Plan B doesn't work, then I don't have Plan C. Well, I do, actually. But how do you... Okay, sound? No sound. No sound. Okay, never mind the sound. I will explain. So we were connecting this subject to control virtual reality. This is around 2004. What you can see, let me show it from the beginning. So the idea is that once you know what you're looking for, you need 2 or 3 channels. It's not too bad in terms of EEG. And, but this particular subject was trained for about 2 years. Okay, after a few weeks she was able to reach very high performance, but some of these subjects need a lot of training, but then they can imagine left hand, right hand, and feet movement and use this BCI. What we have done in this project, European project, is to connect this with a virtual reality. Okay? So this is a cave, basically stereoscopic projection on the floor and on 3 walls. So the idea is to give the person a sensation of being in a virtual street. And then this was a task, we tried several tasks. This was a task that was very, very successful. And the subject was able to basically walk down the street using, imagining feet to walk, imagining hand to stop, right hand to stop, feet to walk. So very limited control in terms of bit rate, but 3 subjects were able to achieve almost 100% success, perform tasks. And later on, we continued with this line of research. Before that, so one limitation that you saw is that the amount of information is quite low. It's a few bits of information, basically 2 or 3 classes, and it takes several seconds to recognize a thought. Another limitation is that many of the studies in BCI, we and others have gone beyond this, but many of the studies in brain-computer interface are cue-based or synchronous. The idea is that ideally what we want, and this is much more difficult, is a continuous system that, while you are in the experiment, whenever you have an interesting thought, we capture it and we apply the system correspondingly. But this is much more difficult. In many cases, what you would see is cue-based interaction, where you are given a cue, the subject is given a cue, and then for 4, 6, 8 seconds, we try to recognize 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 possibilities of what they are trying to do, and then capture this. So especially in EEG, this has to be time-locked, and continuous BCI remains to be a challenge. So this is to give you a very quick sense that things are possible, but we still have many challenges. This is work from 8 to 10 years ago. We've done a series of studies in which we also had a tetraplegic patient navigate virtual reality. I'm not going to show you the video. Again, limited control, but a patient who was almost completely paralyzed in 4 limbs was able to perform a simple task in a virtual reality. We consider this as a simulation of wheelchair control, and we have a series of studies looking at the first ever studies of controlling an avatar with your thoughts. So you imagine your right hand and the avatar moves your hand. You imagine your feet, the avatar starts walking. So we are looking at this as studies in virtual embodiment or re-embodiment. But at this time, more or less after these actually 2 European projects, I was a bit frustrated with EEG. Again, it works, it's a limited signal, and we were trying to think out of the box to suggest a European project which would take it further. And this is how I convinced Rafi Malach to hook up the fMRI instead of the EEG to these kind of studies, and I was fortunately he agreed. But in 2009, we came up with a research proposal. At the same time, Hollywood was busy with these movies. We did not copy from them, and they did not copy from us. It happened all in the same time. Some of you might be familiar with Avatar. There's another movie which is exactly identical to our research proposal. It's a terrible movie with Bruce Willis. You probably don't want to see the movie. Our research really is much more interesting. But the idea is exactly what we suggested. So in a futuristic society, well, we didn't suggest that, but the application is similar. In a futuristic society, people are lying down in their basement, completely protected, and they're represented in the real world by physical surrogates, okay, which look like them, but a little better, and they can do all kinds of dangerous things. If something happens to them, they are replaced, and you control these surrogate bodies by thought, and you experience things through these surrogate bodies, okay? Now, so what we suggested at the same time to the European Union is that we do it for real, with a fraction of the budget, of course. Seriously, think about it. Hollywood, with a much, 100 times more budget, are only doing a fiction movie. And we said we could do it with the limitations of science and technology. But this is a picture from our research proposal, this subject lying down with virtual reality goggles. But this is not for virtual reality. It's for, of course, stereoscopic vision, camera-based vision, connected to all kinds of neurophysiological recordings, embodied as this surrogate body. This particular robot is part of our project. We are fortunate to have a French group that has access to these humanoid large projects. And the project is now in advanced stages, and there's a lot of very interesting things done in this project, but, well, I don't see what it says.
It says 5, but it's 4.
Ah, okay. So let's move very quickly. So this was from the research proposal. This is from a study that we've done. You see the subject is lying down in the fMRI scanner. First practices, sees himself as an avatar, and then controls the robot. I think in the time left, since I have much less time than I thought, I would skip all the science, which, well, I don't know. I think you took 10 minutes, no? I will skip all the science.
Okay, we'll give you 3 more.
Okay, let's do this. Okay, let's do this. I'll try to give some highlights. Okay, so these are fMRI. The idea was to have a system based on fMRI. Now, these are fMRI. The good news is that you have much better spatial resolution. You can distinguish left hand, legs, and feet in fMRI. However, this is also misleading because these are also averaged over many, many trials. And remember, we want a single trial success. Okay? So we've had 2 methods. One method is basically manually detect regions of interest in the brain. Basically, you do a localizer, you mark these areas, and then you do some normalization, you do it properly with the right baseline. But basically, you check the ROI that has the maximum activity is the one that the command is sent to the avatar or to the robot. and this is the video that I may or may not have time to show you, is based on this simple method. Okay, simple, of course, it was a lot of engineering work, but it works, and there are some results in terms of the speed of control, which is interesting. So we had, subjects navigate very, very complex trajectories like a tropical island, which is, you cannot do this probably with the EEG-based BCIs. And we did this study where they had to repeat lots of times this simple task of reaching a balloon so we can measure performance. And the bottom line is that it works. And the delay is still, even though this would be the typical delay in a standard offline experiment. So you see that you can get to 100% classification, but that would be 8. This is a scanning time of 2 seconds. So that would be 8, 10, 12 seconds after the trigger. And the bottom line is that online, using this simple method, people got a optimal performance in 4 and 6 seconds after the delay. So we are getting a little faster. The main thing that I want to tell you about is that in the last year or two, we have developed this this system that is based on machine learning of the whole brain. We're using a much more sophisticated method. Rather than manually looking at which areas light up, it's all done automatically using a combination of something called info gain, information gain. You have a lot of voxels, so we start with 200,000 voxels. First, we can do simple filters based on the raw values and maybe take out the eyes because there's a lot of noise coming from the eyes or whatever. But we still have too many voxels and very little samples, a very small, large number of samples. So we filter. There's many approaches in machine learning how to decide which features to select, and we use something called information gain, which is generic and interesting, and then we are left with the good voxels, with the good areas in the brain that are the best to feed to these machine learning classifiers. And based on this method, so the advantages of this method is that it's generic, it works very well, and it works on every mental task that you can do in the fMRI. We've done not only motor movement and motor imagery, but another student very quickly was able to use this for classifying visual categories. Again, these are things that are simple, but it's the first, well, I don't know if it's the first time, but remember, here we're talking about doing it very, very fast, single trial basis, reaching 90% and higher, okay? So you can make interactive scenarios based on these classifications, okay? So, and we are looking at things, this is all work in progress, we are looking at very interesting things such as how many voxels, what is the optimal number of voxels that we need, what is the minimum number of voxels that we need to separate different mental patterns. There's a lot of exciting ongoing work. I will show you maybe half a minute of video and then we can wrap up. Well, if I can show you the video. Plan B. Okay, so this is the experiment. I want to give you a sense of how it looks like. So the subject lies down in the scanner in Weizmann, and this is work by Ori Cohen, a PhD student working in IDC and also in Weizmann and also in Bar Ilan with Moshe Koppel, and of course Rafi Malach and his group. So this is training. Both are training. The subject is training to control the avatar, and the system is training to get a model of the specific brain activity of that subject at that particular day. And then we did this. Basically, again, the subject is here in Rehovot, feeding these commands to this robot and seeing through cameras that are mounted on the robot. And what happened is that, this experimenter holds the robot so that it doesn't trip. That's the only goal of this person holding the little robot in the leash. That's what they let us practice, because this is only a 60,000 euro robot. So now, after this was successful, now we are starting to play with this large humanoid robot that I showed you earlier. So, and this experimenter is marking to the subject where to go. In this case, this task was to follow a shape of an 8, so we can make sure that the robot can go where the subject can navigate in all directions. Another task, we hid this red teapot somewhere in the room, and the person had to go and look for it. So again, the person is in Weizmann, has to go look for this teapot while he's embodied in this little robot in France. And one of the things we did in the last day was, by surprise, place a mirror in front of this little robot. So this subject, who's been training for a whole week to control the robot in France, suddenly sees himself in the mirror, embodied as a 1 meter small robot. So there's a lot of potential for all kinds of, I had time basically to talk about the engineering effort and to mention this in a popular level. There are lots of not only engineering challenges, but also experimental questions and scientific questions. And this is where it goes together with, think about neurofeedback again, just to conclude, think about how this paradigm could go together not only with controlling robots remotely, but with training very, very specific brain activity patterns with psychological correlates, giving you rich virtual feedback. There's a lot of ongoing things, ongoing work that I can tell you about it, but not only I don't have time, but I will have to kill you afterwards. There's a lot of very interesting experiments going on right now with this technology. Okay? Thanks.
Questions to Doron?
You talked a little bit about feedback, but a lot about moving around in the world is about proprioception, and how do you involve that in the research?
Fantastic. So another part of VERE, which I didn't, the project is called VERE, Virtual Embodiment and Robotic Re-Embodiment. And what we are building, our colleagues have built in Italy, is an embodiment station. So the idea is that while you're moving, you get very, very specific stimulation of muscles, synchronous to your imagery. And some of it works fantastic. It's not like a perfect illusion, but you can, move your hand like this. You are wearing the virtual reality, or you see a video or a virtual reality. You're stimulated, and you think you moved your hand even if you didn't. And it's a whole body system. Go to Pisa, and you'll be able to try it on.
Last question from a student, from an avatar, from